Okay, so let's wait another minute and then we will start, because I do want us to have a lot of time for Q&A. So I'm going to start soon, pushing the record button on, or Matthew, maybe you would like to do that if I give you the possibility to do it. Let's see.
It's already recording, I think.
Yeah, I've already started.
You have? Mine is paused. Okay, let me push it as well.
Okay, that sounds like a smart idea.
Yeah, but thank you, Matthew. I don't know what I would do without you. I hope you will meet all those people one day, because you do a great job. Okay, so we have Gothenburg, Sweden, Petter Granström coming in, Germany again, New Hampshire. Oh, I'm interested in New Hampshire. So let's start. It's 2 minutes past 8. People are still coming in, but I think we should start, and it's recorded, so you can always take part of this webinar later. First, I would like to say welcome to our 6th webinar during 2021. We try to offer those webinars pretty frequently, because we do think it's an important format, and it's free. So in that way, we can also spread the knowledge, and we can have a discussion in a community that just become bigger and bigger. So I'm the director of the Rendanheyi Silicon Valley Center. The center was co-created 1 year ago by HMI at Higher and Menlo College. Our mission is to expand the community of people that want to understand the management of the digital age, as well as to get support from experts like our Stephen Denning and Bill Fischer, but also from peers like yourself attending today in your own transformation of your company. We know there is a lot of people out there that are maybe feeling alone and feeling a mounting pressure because we are all in the same kind of seat. We need to change, but we might not know how, and it's urgent, and we understand that. So we want to be here to help you. So we offer free webinars, certificate management courses, and also, if you need, corporate programs where we can navigate you more in a tailor-made way. The webinars, like the one today, it's primarily for you. So everyone attending today, this is for you. It's for you to get free insight from absolutely leading experts in the world, like our lead instructor, Steve Denning, and our Bill Fischer, but also to ask questions. In order to manage those webinars, you are unfortunately mute and you are not on video, but please use the chat window and ask questions along the way. And I will try to pick up as many questions as possible so we can get those answered at the end. But why don't we start with our lead instructor, Steve Denning, to give his thoughts and some insights from his new book as well, that is going to be labeled The Digital Age, simply The Digital Age. What else do we need to know? So, Steve, welcome to the floor, and give us some insights. What's going on?
Thanks, Annika, and delighted to be here with you all today. And this topic, winning in the age of digital, is a big topic. We're going to cover the history of the human race and its future in 15 minutes. So you might need to fasten your safety belt. We'll got a lot of ground to cover. And the main point is that we are, in fact, living in a new economic age, the age of digital. There have only been 3 great economic ages in the history of the human race. First, we had the age of agriculture, about 10,000 years, where things were driven by animal power and they moved rather slowly. We moved on to the age of industry, took 250 years or so with steam, oil, electricity, and atoms became more important than animals. But it was interesting that it was really only the last 100 or 80 years of the industrial age that we really got a great deal of benefit. There were benefits in the earlier stage, but things really took off once the right technology joined with management, and then we got some massive benefits for society. And now we're in a different age, the age of digital, which has been underway for maybe 10, maybe 20, depends on how you count. And this is an age in which organizations are delivering instant, frictionless, intimate value for free or almost for free. And this changes everything. This, when it was first experienced by most of us, was like magic. It changed our lives, how we work, how we communicate, how we entertain ourselves, how we read, listen to music, watch theater, how we get about, how we shop, how we play, watch games. And it's really just beginning. This has transformed society already, but more is on the way. And one of the things we've learned is that digital can help reinvent almost everything for the better. It's not just about big tech. This is a main game changer. I mean, it's now, as you see in these companies, which are in washing machines and automobiles and hoteling and restaurants and agriculture and gaming, every sector is potentially getting the benefit or at the risk of being affected by the age of digital. And the second thing we learned, which we didn't know for quite a few years, is that digital makes a ton of money. It's not just a sideshow. This is the main game. So the 5 largest firms in the world, you know them all, they are currently worth $9 trillion. That's equivalent to 40% of the US economy. It's a really big amount of money. And these firms at the bottom, they are smaller, but they are growing very, very rapidly. And what we're seeing is that digital firms crush the old industrial firms. We take a couple of examples like IBM and GE. They were the most valuable firms on the planet 20 years ago. Now they're midgets. Apple and Amazon 20 years ago were midgets. Now they're giants. So this has changed everything. And it's interesting, for instance, that IBM, which has the most powerful computer in the world, Watson, is still a digital midget. It hasn't been able to monetize the benefit of having the smartest people in the world and having the best technology in the world. Technology by itself doesn't make the digital age. It must be managed differently. Digital has to be managed differently. The old way of running things simply doesn't work in this new world. And so you get a new economic age when you combine new technology and new management, you get a new age. So in the industrial age, when we had just steam and oil and electricity, we didn't get the big changes until we added hierarchical bureaucracy. And that's when the big changes started. And that hierarchical bureaucracy, which we know and love, is based on these elements. It's based on internal efficiency, making money. It's about bosses controlling individuals, and it's a steep vertical hierarchy. And this is the way organizations will run in the 20th century and the way many big organizations are still being run. And what we've learned is that this doesn't work with digital. And though that way of running things simply doesn't function with the kind of changes that are needed, the speed of change that is required. And as a result, although many of these firms are undertaking digital transformations, they call it, most of those are failing. In fact, digital transformations was one of the top buzzwords of the last decade, but most of them are not working. What we found is that we need a different way of running things. So when we combine computers and the internet with a different way of running things, agile management, then the digital age could be born. And as I've written in my book, the digital age is governed in the first place by these 3 laws of agile, a very opposite of what how firms were run in the 20th century. And so there is the law of the customer, the law of the small team, and the law of the network. And these are basically a different mindset, a different way of thinking about how work gets done. And let me say a word about each of those laws. In the first law, the law of the customer, this is an obsession with adding value to customers. It's I called it a Copernican revolution in management, similar to the Copernican revolution in astronomy, where Copernicus pointed out that the sun did not revolve around the earth. In fact, it was the earth that revolved around the sun, contrary to the evidence of our senses. In the same way, in the world of commerce, the customer does not revolve around the firm in the new age. In fact, the firm revolves around the customer. This is a radical shift in perspective on how the world works. And this is not just about satisfying customers or doing whatever you can for the customer. This is about delighting the customer, creating extraordinary value for the customer, using the power of the technology. And it's not just about thinking that you might be delighting the customer. This is about measuring the customer response. Those most successful firms are not just guessing that they are delighting the customer or surveying the customer. They are actually looking at whether customers are using what they're doing and how they are using it, and whether they are using it more, so that you know whether in fact you are delighting the customer. The second law, the law of the small team, the idea that instead of individuals reporting to bosses, you have small self-organizing teams working in short cycles and delivering value to customers. And in this world, the manager's role changes from being a controller to being an enabler. And the third law, the law of the network, idea that instead of having a hierarchy of authority with a big boss at the top and a hierarchy, the commands going down the line, and instead it's a network of competence. There are leaders all over the firm. Ideas can come from anywhere, go horizontally, upwards as well as downwards. Leadership everywhere in the organization. And this is not just for the private sector. It's interesting that in the US, the new administration has in fact adopted the idea of Agile as the cornerstone of the president's management agenda. And in fact, if you read the documents about the change that they're introducing, the 3 laws of Agile figure prominently the essence of what they see, the meaning of Agile, even in the public sector. And when you introduce this kind of thinking into an organization, existing organization, conflicts arise everywhere, because this is in fact the opposite of the way firms are run in the industrial era. So it's not easy to get from one to the other. So what does the transformation look like? How do you get from A to B? Well, one of the things we'll be talking about in the executive training course we're holding later in the year is the story in Microsoft, one of the spectacular examples, which when I visited Microsoft in 2004, it was a quintessential industrial organization. Even though they were in the computer business, they were running things like a car company. They were selling software in cellophane jackets, and it was top down, and it was very hierarchical, and it was like a warship. It was very difficult to change direction, and it was doing okay. It was making money, but it wasn't growing. And when I came back in 2015, it was incredible, the change in parts of the organization. Those parts were not like a giant warship. They were like a fleet of speedboats. They were able to change direction on the fly. And that was part of the organization. Other parts of the organization were still in the old mode. Today, the whole organization is running like that, and due in part to the efforts of the CEO, Satya Nadella, since 2014. And he did 7 things that changed Microsoft from what it was, an industrial company, to a truly digital firm. And we'll talk more about that in the Q&A and in the executive training course. And we'll look at this journey that has been really going on for about 15 years. And it's went through from 1 team to 3 teams, to 20 teams to 300 teams. and eventually the whole organization. So it is a major thing to move from an industrial organization to a digital organization. But once you've done that, once you have the three laws of Agile in place, then you can start to do some amazing things. You can start to create new businesses systematically. This is something that industrial organizations had great trouble with. When they tried to branch out into new sectors, they generally failed. Once you have the basics in place in an Agile organization, we see that firms like Amazon or SRI are able to continue to make and create new businesses with new markets and new customers, so that they are able to grow almost infinitely. They are not limited to their particular sector in which they started. They are able to move into new territory, which means, of course, they are a big threat to any organization. Amazon or Microsoft might suddenly move into your sector, and you thought you were the top. You may no longer be. Now you are facing a huge giant that can move into your sector. And another thing you can do is to create platforms and ecosystems, so that you can start by having other firms actually deliver benefits, as in Amazon's marketplace, or you can then start to collaborate with these other firms, and then even collaborate with customers, as we'll see in Hire and in John Deere, that you have a whole ecosystem with a whole group of companies interacting with the customers, a very different way and potentially a very powerful way of running a sector. And in the digital firm, we also see that to make these things happen, everyone has to be a leader. It's not just leadership at the top, it's leadership throughout the organization. And how does everyone become a leader? Many people not really seeing themselves as leaders, they're seeing themselves as part of an organization. How do you become a leader? Well, one of the things we'll be looking at in the workshop is how to make that happen, and how to use not only management tools, sharing information, and even power tools to tell people what to do, but more importantly, inspiring people, inspirational leadership tools. We'll be looking, how do you do that in an organization? How do you actually make it happen? And one of the things we'll be having a workshop on in the executive training course is how you do that. How do you inspire people not just to change, but to want to change? And in this transition, it's huge. Every job description is different from what it was in the industrial era. And in the workshop, we're looking at all of these different functions, which they have the same names. You read some of my articles this week about the CEO. The CEO of an industrial organization has a very different job from the CEO of a digital organization. They have the same title, but they are doing radically different things. And all of these jobs, they all have different functions in the digital organization. And we'll be looking at a diagnostic tool to help you figure out how you can see where you are in your transition, how far along in terms of becoming a digital organization. So executive training courses takes place in October and November. It's 12 hours, 3 4-hour sessions, and successive Wednesdays. And so the first day we'll be looking at what exactly is digital, going into that in more detail, having a very practical skill building course in leadership storytelling. Day 2, we'll be having a workshop with Kurt Carlson, who will be showing how you create new businesses, this amazing skill that these firms have developed, what's involved in making that happen on a systematic basis. And on day 3, we'll be wrapping up all of the findings that we've had in the workshop and the tests that you've been doing in between the sessions, and looking at diagnosing how far you've come and where you have to go. So I hope you'll be able to join us in that workshop later on in the year. And this is different. This is a different way of running an organization. And this is our way of helping show you how to get into and profit from this new way of running an organization. And we're delighted to have Bill Fischer here, who will be in the executive training course in October, November. And be talking about the Hire case. So I'll leave it to Bill to explain why is this case as special as it really is.
Thank you very much. Before we let our next lead instructor in, I just want to comment and give some feedback. It's amazing to listen to you. Every time I listen to you, Steve, it's a fantastic and very dense summary of what's actually going on. And I think many of you might feel sort of the same frustration as maybe we do as well. That we all know that management is changing and the new economy is demanding something else. But there are so many voices out there and so many labels on those new principles of management. So it's confusing us. So we try in our webinars and in our courses to really guide you what are these meta principles that you should navigate your organization towards, and also how do you do it, because that is the problem, right? It's not only what is it, but how do you do it. And that is why we now would like to listen to Professor Fischer, that is a professor at both MIT and IMD. And he was one of the first that noticed that something was going on in China. And we don't then refer to technology, but to management and management innovation. So welcome up on stage, Zoom stage, Professor Fischer.
Thanks, Annika. Thank you, Steve. It's good to be here. I'd like to spend just a few minutes talking about what's happening at the Hire organization to introduce, maybe even demystify the idea of Rendanheyi, which is a management philosophy of transformation, and give you some sense of the general principles that Annika just spoke about and Steve mentioned as well in his presentation. Let me start by saying we're starting off the workshop that Steve introduced by looking at the example of Hire. It's a transformation experience, 4 decades long, continuous journey, which gives us a really interesting bandwidth to look at what's happening. More important, I think it's a large 70,000 people traditional hardware manufacturer in an old economy commodity industry. So, unlike so many transformation stories, which are, Silicon Valley based, kids in flip-flops running around, changing the world, this is about 70,000 real people making real things and trying to deal with the implications of what that means. They have increased global competition, they've got radical technological change, and they need or they've chosen to be proactive with respect to the customer experience. And so this is about remaining relevant in an unfamiliar world. It's the story of Hire. And Hire went from being nearly bankrupt in 1984 to today, where it's the largest manufacturer of home appliances in the world and a leader both in the technologies and customer experiences that are part of that industry. I think the reason we start off with Hire, it's a vivid story. It's a long, we have a long time period to look at. Its scope, everybody's in. It's not one small part of the organization that's testing radical transformation. It's everybody. It's bold, it's daring, experimental, and it's worked. So the success of Hire really gives it, I think, a degree of credibility, as well as the length of the experience that very few other organizations have. Annika just spoke about guiding principles. At the heart of Hire's philosophy, and that's what Rendanheyi, it's not an approach, it's a philosophy, are 3 guiding principles. This will give you a taste of what they're trying to do. The first is to create a great customer experience. And that agrees really well with what Peter Drucker said was the purpose of a business, which is to create and keep a customer. You notice he's not saying shareholder wealth is the purpose of a business, but the purpose of a business is to create and keep a customer. And the implication is if you do that right, then shareholder wealth is forthcoming. Hire has pursued great customer experience throughout the nearly 4 decades it's been involved in transformation. At the same time, the second general principle, which has also been pursued over 4 decades, is that entrepreneurship is the best way to achieve this. If we can connect people with an entrepreneurial mindset with user needs, then we have a possibility of really adding the expertise of the firm to the customer journey of the users we're hoping to convert into lifelong co-creators. So what Drucker said was innovation is all about knowing rather than doing. And if you can get close enough to the customer to know them, maybe even better than they know themselves, then you have the opportunity to apply your expertise, which is substantial to their issues. So in Drucker's words, the entrepreneur is always searching for change, responding to it, and exploiting it as an opportunity. And that's a challenge for most organizations. Of course, they're not built that way. They're not built to free up entrepreneurial energies. They're not built to respond quickly, and they're not used to sharing, opening up and sharing opportunities. There's a third general principle that Hire follows that was added by Chairman Chong Wei Min, and that is that if you convert your users or your customers to co-creators and you convert your employees to entrepreneurs, then everyone who participates in this ought to share in the value created. And so there's a difference in value distribution, which makes for the Rendanheyi that we've spoken about. It's about customer experience, it's about entrepreneurship, and it's about sharing value created. With respect to customer experience, at Hire, it's about creating micro enterprises, small units that are able to move fast and act entrepreneurially. It's also about not only calling your employees entrepreneurs, but allowing them to act as entrepreneurs, giving them the rights to create small businesses, to hire and fire, to share the rewards created. And finally, it's about the sharing of value. It's about really literally making sure that the incomes of the people within Hire are determined by market success or failure, so that it's a direct link between the organization and the customers involved. An example of, and you know, the advent of the Internet of Things and hyperconnectivity means that Hire, almost every organization I can think of, needs to access unfamiliar expertise domains. So a big piece of this transformation today is about ecosystems. For me, the best illustration of this is that in a year marked by a pandemic and lockdowns, Hire decided that it would celebrate Chinese New Year by inviting in 9 of the great chefs of China representing China's 9 regional cuisines and put them in a position where they could work with the customers to create dining experiences at home based on the expertise of the chefs. So they brought in, not only did they build an ecosystem around the chefs, but they brought in recipe creators, ingredients manufacturers, packagers, logistics systems, so that all over China on New Year's Eve, Chinese families could gather around home-cooked meals using the ingredients and recipes recommended by the chefs. That's different. That's moving from making refrigerators solutions to really redesigning the customer dining experience. It's about getting so close to the customer that you work with them to build that customer experience. It goes beyond mere boxes and packages, solutions to an intimate relationship with the customer and with ecosystem partners. And it means creating opportunities for all so that it sustains itself after Chinese New Year. The message, I think, is that old organizational frameworks, formats, and leadership mindsets are no longer reliable to do this. As Steve pointed out, they were never created to do that. They were created for 20th century needs, but the 21st century is fundamentally different. Over 4 decades, Hire has experimented in trying to put these guiding principles to work. They inherited a traditional command and control pyramid. They experimented with matrix organizations, strategic business units. They turned the pyramid on its head. And today they're trying to build a system that's much more of a network and much more entrepreneurial than anything they've seen before. Steve talked about the laws of Agile. What we see is new laws being created about customer involvement, about size of the organization, and about the importance of networks. We see it at Steve's examples, and we certainly it's illustrated at Hire as well. So I think the way I would summarize this is many of the same ideas that Steve is talking about in his work on the future of 21st century management are also seen in Rendanheyi, moving from simple product hunting to purpose creating, moving from hierarchies to networks, from controlling to empowering, planning to experimentation. You've got to transform mindsets before you transform anything else. And at Hire, what that's meant, and what we'll talk about in the workshop, is how do you redefine the customer experience? How do you rethink organizational purpose? How do you unleash entrepreneurial energies? How do you make it easier to do all of this rather than harder? How do you change customer, partner, and employee mindsets? And then how do you share the value created? I hope this is of interest to you. And I certainly hope you join us for one of the workshops in the fall. I'm looking forward to seeing you there. Thank you.
So thank you so much. Again, a fantastic presentation, Professor Fischer. So as you can see, it's not an easy transformation that many companies need to do. As Steve mentioned before, where we usually are in most companies and where we need to go, it's a pretty big leap that we need to make. So we need to help each other to understand how to make this. And one way of doing that is, of course, by talking with each other and getting insight from experts like today, and also to go deeper into potentially workshop if you're interested. So we now open up for Q&As from anyone. So we have someone is using the Q&A here. So we have a first question. So let's do this. Use the Q&A. So we channel all question in one channel, so I don't need to go between the chat and the Q&A. So let's use the Q&A. Okay, so we have, I think this is from India, right? What are the most usual challenging areas you experience with digital and agile transformation in the public sector? And what would be your advice to overcome that? So who wants to take that one?
Let me start, and Bill can then add some other dimensions. I mean, one is sometimes the customer isn't clear in a public sector organization. If you take, say, a State Department, who is the customer of the State Department? It has many customers, so that you then have to translate the idea of the role of the customer to the purpose of the organization, and figure out what is the purpose of the State Department, or what is the purpose of the Defense Department. And so that's one stumbling block to get clear on that. A second is that the public sector organizations in government anyway are often governed by regulations and laws which cannot be changed by the people implementing the organization. They need to be changed by other people. So then the question is, well, what do you do when you have such intrusive kind of regulations? And the long run, of course, is to clean up the regulations. But what do you do in the interim? And what we have found in the private sector is that even where there are regulations governing things, it is possible to have discussions with the regulators and agree that some things are more important than others, and that for the sake of progress, we should focus on the more important things. So, for instance, Barclays Bank found that when they were trying to do things, regulations asked them to do, say, 359 things when they tried to make a change. And of course, you can't even begin to focus on 359 things. So they went to the regulator and said, well, look, that's crazy. Here's this thing we're planning to do. These are the 10 most important things If we were to focus on those, would that be okay? And the regulators really sighed with relief and said, thanks so much for clarifying, because we can't monitor 359 things either. And so they were able to move forward by having discussions with the regulators. The other aspect of it is that public sector organizations are able to move very fast when there's a crisis. I saw that in the World Bank, where they're very, very good at handling emergencies. They did some amazing things last year with the COVID and rapidly put loans. But then after the crisis is over, suddenly all the restrictions come back again, and the public sector organization moves back into the slow motion that they had before. So one of the opportunities is to say, what can we learn from those emergency type actions where we are agile? We're able to be agile when we need to be. Why don't we learn from that and apply more of that to every day, not just in an emergency? Bill, what do you think?
Let me just add one thing very quickly, and that is, and it's not just for the public sector, it also appears in the private sector. It's a mindset issue. It's almost an inability for B2B firms and for government organizations to see that they are similar in many ways to B2C firms or to any sort of business enterprise, and be able to take the lessons learned from one and apply it back to their own. It's really not so much that there are physical constraints, but it's mindset constraints in being able to do that. And I think that that's the biggest issue that I see in my courses, is that you've got to convince people that you're not all that special, that everybody has the same issues and we can learn from them.
We have another question here, and I would like to direct that to Professor Fischer directly. How much does the CEO need to be on board for the transformation to succeed? From my experience, the CEO can push the transformation or break it. What's your experience?
So that's a great question. I think that so I think the CEO and senior management needs to be engaged without a doubt. I think that what we miss when we think about that, or when I respond that way, is that it's not top down versus bottom up. It's both, right? You need to have the top management committed, but you also need to liberate the minds and energy of the people below to accept that responsibility and take on change. So my sense is you need both, not just one or the other.
Yeah. And
I would add that, if you don't mind, that it's also a sequential thing, that in some cases, in Amazon, the change started at the top, but in other cases, like Microsoft, it didn't. It started lower down in the organization. The top management was really totally opposed to that whole mindset. It was the top management. Steve Ballmer was very adversarial, but there were people lower down who had grasped the need to change, and they started innovating. And what they were working towards was a day when you would have a new CEO and be able to take that across the organization. So the fact that you don't have the CEO on board on day one doesn't necessarily mean you can't get started, and you should be building a coalition to actually have a CEO acting in a very different way and supporting something, and to actually take it forward so that when the CEO does get on board, she's not starting from scratch, that in fact there's a whole army of people who are ready to move.
It's a very, very, very important addition that you make there, Steve. It's interesting because Microsoft specifically, their journey started, as you said, in 2008, and the new CEO came on board in 2014. But the mindset of the new CEO really supported that growth of the change process. So maybe they are like hand in the glove. There need to be a bottom-up approach, and also, of course, the support in order to scale it onto an enterprise level. We have another question here. How do we translate this into a district climate change strategy? We have set up a climate commission for the district. I'm conscious that communication are also key. I have been advocating Stephen's work on that to change the communications dynamic. So, Steve.
The climate change is of course a monumental challenge, which cannot be totally dealt with as a management issue. It also is a huge public policy issue, and so that there would need to be a two-pronged approach, where you would have a political change going on, but also organizations mobilizing to do whatever's necessary. And obviously they would have to be managed in an agile fashion, because most organizations will also have to adjust how they deal with climate issues.
And Bill, do you have any? So I think it's a great question about climate change strategy and corporate social responsibility overall. I think it's a huge, if you do change your management model and do apply entrepreneurship at scale for every employee and involve employees in innovation work, then of course you could have one of the innovation areas as climate change or corporate social responsibility, and make those innovation activities priority. So I do think again that they can ignite each other, hopefully. It's definitely a strategic focus area for the company that they can use in their innovation work. We have a similar, more complex question from an anonymous attendee. How do you take into account offensive and defensive cybersecurity? I cannot answer that. Any one of you that want to try?
Well, this is one of the tremendously complex issues that you have in software, and it's beyond the scope of this workshop. But it needs a constant and massive attention from the organization. It's essentially.
Oh, now we have.
Role,
Okay, so we seem to have some internet issues here.
That has.
Mm. Are you back?
It has huge behavioral implications as well. Staff have to act differently in order to ensure cybersecurity.
Yep. So, Bill?
Yeah, if I could, when we talk about unorganizing or taking organizations and transforming them into smaller autonomous units that are more entrepreneurial, that doesn't mean that we're abdicating responsibility for the organization, mandating certain things that have to be similar across the organization. So in the case of something that Annika and I have worked on, we've seen that connectivity between different units of smart units need to be ensured. So, compliance with a common set of connectivity formats is required. I think cybersecurity would fall into that. So you're not going crazy. You're not breaking up the entire organization. Certain things remain necessary. Brands might very well be part of that as well.
I would agree. And coming back to the question about also climate change and corporate responsibility for have a positive impact in the world. Definitely that would be a common factor as well between them. We have one question here about what are the major technologies that embrace digital age? And if you may, I would like to start answering that question, because I was astonished when I saw the model that Bill had been explained before, the higher model on the Rendanheyi, because and this you can comment on that, Bill, if you don't agree with me, but that model with a networked organization, entrepreneurship at scale, great customer experience, and they even call it zero distance to the user, right? it's based on technology. And the technology is not the most important thing. It's the mindset is the most important thing and the principles, but the technology makes it possible. And so in my journey, when I have started to really understand that model, it's all about big data analytics, it's blockchain technology, it's AI technology / machine learning. And of course, I guess sensor technology and automation of their factories and manufacturing plants, and everything is connected, right, with internet technology. So, and then of course, cloud. So there you have, in a very short 2-second, answer from me, all the technologies that I've seen being connected to make the Rendanheyi enabled. Bill, maybe you don't agree with me. Do you have any?
No, I agree completely. But I would point out that in 1984, when this whole thing really began, when the initial elements of Rendanheyi were being put into place, the dominant technology was paper and pencil. It was, and over time, that's evolved to very sophisticated computer-based systems, both inside and outside. But the focus has not been on the technology. The focus has always been on the customer experience and creating entrepreneurial opportunities for the workforce. And the technology has been the enabler.
Right. So again, technology is enabling it. It's not leading it.
Right.
There we have a huge, I think, difference in the world, with a lot of consulting companies out there that try to make companies to first implement the technology and then figure out and change and do culture transformation. The culture transformation is so much bigger, so much harder than implementing the technology, even if that is hard too, to get people to use it. We do have a question. Steve, do you want to add something to the technology aspect before?
Let me just add that the technologies are amazing and they keep evolving, and it is exponential, not only in the sense that each individual technology is evolving so rapidly, but they are interacting with each other. And the combination of the rapid change in each individual technology and the combination of joining them together, that is what is making this so unpredictable about where things will end up. Well, they're not going to end up anywhere. They'll just keep continuing to change.
Okay.
Could I jump in? So I agree completely with what Steve just said. And there was a question from Pierre Emmanuel about companies that initiate transformation without changing their organizational structure or culture. And it seems to me that, that's the height of hubris, or that to believe that we can experience this sort of technological opportunities, if you will, without changing our organizational leadership mindsets. It strikes me as being preposterous.
But also that happens every time there is a huge change in technology.
Yeah.
Every time there is a huge change, it takes decades or even centuries for the human race to figure out it doesn't make sense to do things the way we were. When electricity came to factories, you could suddenly electrify the factory. So what did they do? They took these factories that had a huge steam engine, which was driving a giant crank across a giant factory, and individual machines were linked by pulleys and chains to this huge crank. And what did they do to electrify a factory? They replaced the huge steam engine with a huge electric motor. And as a result, there was absolutely no change in productivity from having electricity. It took 40 years before factories realized that is stupid. We need to connect electricity to each individual machine so that we're not running the whole factory at full speed all the time. We only run the individual machines when we need it. But this takes decades to happen. And so we shouldn't make fun of these people too much for doing things that don't make much sense. It really is a difficult process to realize that everything you've known and done and been successful with your whole life suddenly has to be turned upside down and done differently.
It's a good point. So now you understand why I love to spend 12 hours of course time with those guys, right? This is what you get, and you can spend 3 half days just discussing with guys like this. We have a great question. We heard about the important new principle of actually understanding, focusing on the customer, and not just talking about it. We talked about making entrepreneurship at scale and the networked organization. We also heard about ecosystem. We have to change from the typical vertical organizational model to an ecosystem. And we have a question here from Aninda. We have seen successful ecosystem built and managed by firms. Do the same ingredients apply to medium and small enterprises if they want to create ecosystem, as these firms are scattered, much more distributed, and of different sizes? And I would like maybe Bill to start with this, because I know that Hire is working with a lot of small enterprises, medium enterprises as part of their huge ecosystem.
So if you think about that example that I used about Chinese meals, those recipe writers typically in the past have been independent, single person or small operations. They are now occasionally part of an ecosystem that requires their services as well. The real challenge for them is, for Hire, is not to try to revert to a traditional value chain mentality, which is all about command and control and building and reliability, but to encourage these very small ecosystem partners to be creative and to come up with ideas that Hire would never think about because of constraints of size and tradition and success. I'm working presently, or I'm involved presently, with 2 very, very small organizations, 6 people or less, which are essentially trying to create micro enterprises so that they can explore ecosystem with different partners, rather than having a division structure, if you will, to 6 people is small, that basically replicates a pyramid. So absolutely, I think there's huge opportunities to think about how do you think about small, really small organizations differently than we have historically.
Steve?
You also need to be thinking that the logic of digital is that you have to be world class. Every organization, if it's going to survive, has to be the best in the world at what it does. If it's not, is in grave danger of being displaced by an organization that finds a way to insert itself into your business. I mean, if you take Domino's Pizza, Domino's Pizza has spent about 40 years becoming the world's biggest and best pizza operation. They have 270,000 pizza shops around the world. They've gone digital. You can get a pizza from them in 22 minutes, and it's very, very efficient. But guess what? They're not competing with Papa John's anymore. They are competing with DoorDash. DoorDash has 3 restaurants, not 270,000. It has 3 restaurants, and it is the deliverer of food from hundreds of different restaurants, all mostly in the US at this point. But now that they have got it working in the US, they are expanding to the rest of the world, because once you figure this out, how you deliver food from a restaurant, you can make it work almost anywhere in the world. So DoorDash, although it only has 3 stores and not 270,000 stores, is worth 3 times more than Domino's. Domino's Pizza is worth 20 billion. DoorDash is worth 60 billion, even though it's got no stores. So even though you're running a pizza store, you may be at risk of being displaced by a firm that comes along and uses digital to insert itself in the middle. So you have to be the best at what you do, and use digital to maximize that to the maximum.
So we have just a couple of more minutes. I want as many questions to be answered as possible. We have another one important here. you often look for local role models to learn from. This is from Sweden, and to be able to exchange experiences with. Do you have good example of companies from Northern Europe or Southern Europe, South America, or other parts of Asia outside China, other than Microsoft, Amazon, Apple?
Um,
Steve, you have a Swedish example, right?
Yeah, I mean, Ericsson is very much in the thick of these things. IKEA, there are scores of organizations across different parts of Europe doing this. It's not an American thing. It just so happens that the 5 biggest and most successful have moved more quickly, but others are on their trail. Spotify, of course, a Swedish based firm, has been hugely successful and is challenging Apple in the music field. So this is a global phenomenon. It's not something that is American. It's global.
And you actually use Spotify as one of your cases,
Right.
in course, right? So Bill, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I've been working with a large food retailer in Russia that's following the same things. You and I have worked with, not worked with is too grand a term in this case, but have been talking to Bosch Power Tools, which comes out of an organization that's historically been very formally structured and is experimenting. Fujitsu North America. So there's a lot of examples outside of North America, China as well, Japan.
I think my conclusion is, as you can hear, we try to find those cases, and public knowledge is mentioning maybe, like max 10 companies, max. But the more I research about companies, the more I understand that it's just because it's not known. So if you believe that you are a company that is at the forefront of this digital new management, then reach out to us so we can also do some research about you and get that more publicly known. Because, for example, I looked at Siemens. I didn't know very much about Siemens, but now I'm really impressed what they've done. Microsoft the same, and we didn't mention Microsoft Garage, which is also a truly interesting aspect of their transformation. We have another question. Can a business organization only be customer-centric when it's digital? Without digital, can an organization be agile? Steve?
Well, you can be certainly customer-centric without being agile. You might be customer-centric in a top-down fashion with a tyrant running the organization. So it's perfectly possible, but it's not a very good way to run an organization. Similarly, it is very difficult to be a successful digital organization if you're not customer focused, and if you're not running the organization in a much more open and collaborative fashion with a network of teams. So there are some similarities and some compatibilities and some incompatibilities.
So with that, we have less than 1 minute left of this webinar. I would love to make a closing remark, telling you that I hope and I wish to be able to see you again, either on the next webinar. So check our website. And if you don't know the website, email me, contact me in some way, and I will make sure you get it. The other thing, you got the link to the course on October 27th. Winning in the Digital Age. You will meet those guys, you will meet me, you will meet a number of case companies, and you will learn much even more than this, if possible, and we will go much deeper. You also got a discount code, which give you 20% on an already very low price. We want to democratize this knowledge, so we put the prices on our courses really low. And with the 20%, it's really low price. So check for the early bird discount. It's early 20, and it's WDA for Winning Digital Age, WDA. So check your chat, and hope to see you soon. Meanwhile, stay safe, take care, and stay tuned to look out our website to see if there is something that interests you. And let us know if you want to in any way partner with us, have research done on a company or something else. So thank you, Stephen Denning. Thank you, Bill Fischer. Thank you, Matthew, for supporting me here again. And thank you, everyone attending from all over the world. Take care.